Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. My name is Molly McLaughlin, and I own a company that optimizes sleep through technology, accountability, and behavioral change. Each week, I'll be interviewing world-class experts ranging from doctors, innovators, and thought leaders to give actionable tips and strategies that you can implement to become a more skillful sleeper. Let's jump into your dose of practical sleep training. Welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Now, this episode, I really hope that you refer to if you are dealing with sleep apnea, or if you know someone who is dealing with sleep apnea, or you are someone that suspects you have sleep apnea, or you are someone that maybe never considered you have sleep apnea. So I guess what I'm saying is that I hope that anyone listening really takes note of today's episode. Why? Because we are going to be discussing all things sleep apnea with an actual great friend of mine. She's been fantastic in this world of sleep to really bring awareness to the topic of not only how to discover if you have sleep apnea, but how to navigate sleep apnea, because anyone that maybe believes that they have sleep apnea or has been diagnosed with sleep apnea, unfortunately, sometimes that's where it ends, and people just say, "Oh, well, I'm not going to wear the mask," or they try and they fail, and then it becomes really an untreated problem. So Emma Cooksey is all about disrupting that. So really about sharing stories of other people with sleep apnea, and herself included, and helping to demystify this problem and really demonstrating how transformative it can be when you get up under this issue and treat it effectively. So a little bit about Emma. She is a podcast host and writer. She was diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea at the age of 30 after more than a decade of unexplained health problems. Once diagnosed, she felt alone while navigating life with sleep apnea and adjusting to CPAP therapy. In 2020, Emma began hosting a weekly podcast, Sleep Apnea Stories, by sharing her journey and encouraging others to tell their stories. Emma has been breaking down stereotypes of sleep apnea while also raising awareness of symptoms and treatment options. As a board member of Project Sleep, a nonprofit, Emma works to raise awareness about sleep health and sleep disorders. And one of the things that we spoke about in this episode is just how often women, unfortunately, are left out of this conversation, and some of their signs for sleep apnea are missed. So we get into more around how you can be on the lookout for possible symptoms for women that might look a little different than it might look for men, or some of the traditional things that we might be thinking about that would denote sleep apnea. So without further ado, let's jump into the podcast. So I get a lot of questions around sleep supplements, and I'm very hesitant to just throw out a whole laundry list of possibilities. One, I don't think it's the most responsible thing to do. I really do believe in testing to see what types of supplements make sense for you. And two, because I really truly believe that most of the things that you can do to improve your sleep are behavioral, psychological, environmental in nature, and often don't cost a dime. However, there is one supplement that I personally take every day and that I do feel quite comfortable with suggesting for most individuals to experiment with, because of a couple of reasons. It's high safety profile and high rates of deficiencies in our modern society. Some put the numbers as somewhere around 80% of the population being deficient in this one area, and that is magnesium. So magnesium has been called the calming mineral, and some report that magnesium can increase GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level, which is critical for sleep. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating our body's stress response system. Those with magnesium deficiency usually have higher anxiety and stress levels, which negatively impact sleep as well. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most magnesium products out there are either synthetic or they only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when in reality, your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. So that's why I recommend a product from my friends over at BioOptimizers. They have created something called the Magnesium Breakthrough. And taking this magnesium before bed helps you relax and wake up refreshed and energized. And while we don't recommend that you go too nuts on looking at all the sleep stage classifications on all your wearables, I will share anecdotally that many clients have reported improvements in their deep sleep trend numbers. Again, I don't want you going nuts on the sleep stage classification numbers on your wearables, but I do want to let you know about that because I know that many of you do reach out on questions of how to improve your deep sleep. So I also love that BioOptimizers offers free shipping on select orders, and they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee on all their products. Plus, they have a customer satisfaction rating of 99.3%. Very impressive. And you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough. Again, this is the same magnesium that I use every single night. And finally, you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough. Again, that's the magnesium supplement that I use every single night by going to magbreakthrough.com/sleep is a skill. And be sure to use the code sleep is a skill for 10% off. And welcome to the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Emma, I am so happy to have you here. Emma is just such a wealth of information, but also personal passion on a topic that I'm clear that one of the things that I want to make sure we do a better job of on the Sleep is a Skill podcast is really, really helping to articulate the whole world that is sleep apnea, which is just, Emma, you can help, educate us and fill us in, but it is just another language. There is just so much there. So I'm just so grateful that you're taking the time to help, one, on this podcast to help us understand this more, but two, taking the time to create what you've created, which is your own podcast, the Sleep Apnea Stories, which I've shared to so many people. So just thank you so much for the work you're doing. And thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful. I love your podcast, so it's exciting to get to be on here. Plus, we're actual in real life friends now because we've actually met.
I know.
I'm loving it.
So cool. I mean, it was so great to meet up with you at Sleep 2022 and being able to just have some good old laughs. And you had your little on the go speaker. You're like an investigative reporter.
With like a lapel microphone. Yes. But it worked.
Oh my God, it was amazing. I was like, geez, I got to step up my game. So yeah, it's just such an honor. I'm wondering if we could kind of start at the beginning for people to really just share, how did it get to be that you certainly discovered your own case of sleep apnea, but then even took the steps to then create this podcast and really make this, your life's work. How did that all begin?
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that. It's my favorite subject.
Yes.
So I am originally from Scotland, just in case anyone's listening and they're kind of like, strange accent, wonder where she's from. So I grew up in Scotland, and then I did 4 years at university studying law. And then right after that, I took a year and I went traveling around the world for a year. And so as part of that, I was living in Australia, in Sydney, and I was working for a big law firm there for 6 months. Well, started out, it was okay, but I really was thinking, I'm quite tired. Like the days seemed quite long and it just was quite grueling work. And, I was there lots of hours. And every morning I would just think, wow, I feel really tired, but I feel as though I just didn't even sleep. And so that kind of progressed and got worse and worse for 6 months, to the point where the last month I was there, I cried in the shower every morning. So I was, waking up in this house full of backpackers and most of them were working in bars and stuff. And I would just take my shower and just have a good cry because I was so tired. And so at that point, I started to think to myself, like, there's something wrong with me. Like, this isn't normal. So I didn't have a doctor there, but when I got back to Scotland, I went to the doctor and I explained all of my different symptoms. So at that point, I was having really bad headaches in the morning. I was waking up a lot at night. I felt really anxious all the time for there's nothing going on in my life to cause any anxiety, but I just felt terrible. And I was really tired. I had daytime sleepiness every day where it was a struggle to stay awake at my job. So the doctor said, okay, we'll run all the tests. So did lots of blood tests. I went back and he said, essentially, there's nothing wrong with you. He was like, yeah, I know all the things you're saying, but we just didn't see anything in the blood tests. So you're probably just a bit stressed, and sent me away.
Ugh.
And so that was kind of a theme that carried on for 10 years, all through my 20s. So I know that we'll probably talk a little bit about women and how this experience can be different for women than it is for men. But a lot of doctors are not looking for sleep apnea in women. So I would go with all of the symptoms of sleep apnea, and I would be told maybe it's a hormonal thing. Maybe you're having mood swings because of your hormones. Maybe it's depression, right? Like people who are depressed have issues with their sleep and feel tired. So I just got no answers for the whole of my 20s. So then I got pregnant with my first child. So really quickly, I moved from Scotland to Florida. I'd met my husband and we got married in Scotland, and then we moved to Florida. And I had my first child. I was pregnant. And so we can talk a bit about it, but sleep apnea gets significantly worse often with pregnancy because there's weight gain. And that can be a factor that exacerbates it. So my sleep got significantly worse while I was pregnant. I had my first daughter, and which was great, all went really well. But I was so exhausted. And of course, everybody's exhausted with a newborn, right? But I knew that it was not just that. So I went to the doctor and I said, I know you're going to say that I have a new baby and that's why I'm tired, but that's not why I'm tired. There's something wrong with my sleep. And they looked at me and they said, I know, but you have a newborn, so that's probably what it is. Well, 3 weeks after that doctor's appointment, I was driving back from my mother-in-law's house, and I was on a really big bridge with like 4 lanes of traffic each side. And I got that feeling that I know a lot of people listening will be able to relate to, where I couldn't keep my eyes open. And I was looking at the truck in front of me that was quite far away, thinking, just keep some distance between you and the truck. The last thing I remember was looking at the license plate and not quite being able to read it. And then I woke up with a start, and the license plate was coming right towards me in slow motion, really big. And I had to slam on my brakes to not hit the truck. So I full on fell asleep. And so that day I went home and I just was determined not to take no for an answer. And I phoned that doctor back and I said, I just fell asleep at the wheel and could have died. I need to find answers about my sleep. So that was how I got a sleep study. And with the sleep study, I got the diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea. And from there, I was prescribed a CPAP machine. So then I pretty much just like most people had no idea what I was doing, had no support. They basically give you a CPAP machine and just leave you to get on with it. And it's quite a difficult therapy to get used to. So I went through like every mask and all the different settings and everything. And so over like months and months, I managed to kind of, settle down with it. And it did start helping me. I didn't feel 100%, but I definitely wasn't falling asleep at the wheel anymore. So that part was really good. Then sort of jump forward, I kind of just went about my business. I had another child. So I had Katie and Rosie, and they were 5 years apart, and just, it was all really busy, and I wasn't really thinking too much about my sleep. And then it got to be the summer of 2020. It was that period where my kids were home because it was quarantine. And I feel like all my friends came up with a project to entertain themselves. Like they were baking sourdough bread or whatever it was. And I just always thought I should start a blog. I never see any women like in the media or out there. I don't really see a lot about sleep apnea at all, but when I do see it, it's only older overweight men that are featured. It's never women, it's never moms. So I kind of thought, well, maybe I should write a blog. But then I realized what I really like doing, as you can gather, is talking to people. So that's where the idea to start the podcast came from. And I started Sleep Apnea Stories really not knowing how it would go. Like my goal was really to just provide a platform for people to share their stories. And I just think there's a lot of power in that, because I know from so many people that have reached out to me that they never, heard of somebody like them, like whether it's like an ultra fit, I interviewed an athlete. I've interviewed several athletes now, but like people are like, well, I went to the doctor and they said I couldn't have sleep apnea because I don't look like someone that would have sleep apnea. So it's really trying to shatter those stereotypes and also feature all the different treatment options, because there are so many now, but we're not hearing about them because they're available from all different, whether it's a dentist or a surgeon or it's all different people, and it's not a very joined up system. So just trying to help people, really.
Amazing. Well, one, thank you so much for sharing your story. And sorry that it had to get to that point. So scary that it had to reach that, to actually have that sense of urgency and be heard, or at least that's what I'm hearing from your doctors and what have you. And it's incredible that you advocated for yourself, because sometimes people miss this altogether and don't connect those dots. So that's fantastic.
That's very common.
So common. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative that you're helping to bridge this gap for people, to say, oh, wait, that's me. I have the morning headaches, and those things see themselves in what you're sharing. So I'm wondering, maybe we could start there. Is like, what are some of the symptoms? What should we be on the lookout for? And what are some of the symptoms that people totally miss, and how are they different between men and women?
Great question. I love that. So the first couple of things that are pretty difficult to ignore are almost everybody has daytime sleepiness.
Yeah.
So sleep apnea is a really strange condition where you can get people, like I've interviewed people who say, I only went to the doctor because my wife said I snored and I didn't really notice any problems. And but that's not most people. Most people, if your sleep is really disrupted by sleep apnea, you're going to be really sleepy during the day. So that's definitely number one. The second thing is, hopefully I can clear up some confusion about this, right? So loud snoring can definitely be a symptom of sleep apnea, but you don't have to snore to have sleep apnea. So especially women, there are some very quiet women who pause breathing and wake up and with a start and feel really anxious and all of the things, but they don't snore, so they think they can't have sleep apnea. But that's not true. People definitely can have sleep apnea and not snore, but that is an indicator. Like if somebody is snoring loudly, equally, you can be a snorer who doesn't have sleep apnea, but it just can be an indicator that there's something not right with your airway. So those are two big things. Let's see what else. Morning headaches can be a really big indicator, just because you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain. So if you have a morning headache, which goes away over time during the day, that, especially if it's kind of like clues, right? So especially if you have sleepiness during the day and you're snoring and you have morning headaches, it starts to build up to be something you should talk to your doctor about, right? So there's those things. Some of the things that I didn't know about before I started my podcast, and I've had a number of experts, like different doctors and sleep specialists on. So there's a few different sexual health things. So erectile dysfunction in men.
Yep.
It's not necessarily, there's not enough research to say sleep apnea definitely causes erectile dysfunction. That's not what the doctor that I interviewed said. But what he did say was there are people who come to him because of sleep apnea, and when they begin treatment for sleep apnea, they will come back and say, I had erectile dysfunction and now it's resolved itself with the effective treatment of the sleep apnea. So again, there's not a research study out there that shows one directly causes the other, but that seems to anecdotally be something that's happening for some men. There's also reduced libido. So people who notice a decline in their libido, sometimes that can be something that happens with sleep apnea. Also, needing to pee at night a lot. So I think sometimes people think like, oh, I'm drinking too much or something to do with my bladder or whatever. People who have sleep apnea often wake up to go to the bathroom a lot of times at night. So again, if you have that along with some of these other things, it would be a really good thing to talk to your doctor about. Let's see what else. Oh my gosh, I feel like I talk about this all the time and then I forget one.
I know. No, there's so many.
Brain fog is huge. So cognitive function during the day, if you notice that you're not able to think of words,
Yeah.
or you get halfway through a sentence and you don't know, like what the end of the sentence is. Those kind of things, like any sort of cognitive impairment, especially if they run along with these other things, can be a sign of sleep apnea. So then I'd also say for people with bed partners, it's really good to have someone observe you sleeping. So you can usually, if you have somebody just watch you when you're sleeping, an apnea will just look like a pause where you think, is the person going to breathe again?
Yeah.
So, and then oftentimes when that pause finishes, the person will go like and gasp at the end of it. So any sort of gasping during your sleep, and even people who are not in a relationship or don't have a bed partner, there's apps now that you can use. There's Snore Lab, like there's a bunch though, like all the different sleep apps usually track that. So you can just do that, and it will usually, as well as the snoring, it will tell you if there's gaps where you don't seem to be breathing because you're not making the noise, kind of thing.
So good. Well, those are great ones, 100%.
Yeah.
Did we articulate too, because I loved what you said about the fact that you got missed.
So yeah, the last part of your question was to do with the differences between men and women.
Yeah, I know. Sorry to throw 10 questions at you. I have a tendency of
No,
doing
that's
that.
okay. I just was like, I think I missed something.
Yeah, no, you're perfect.
Yeah. So the last part is sleep apnea can often show up really differently between men and women. And it also just shows up differently between different people. It just depends why your airway is becoming blocked or obstructed. So with women, so the part that I missed out there was to do with mood and mental health, right? Yeah. So it's worth saying most people I talk to who've been struggling with sleep apnea, like there's some sort of mental health thing going on as well, because as you know, if your sleep is really disrupted, I mean, there's so many great things that are supposed to be happening while you're asleep to your brain. Yeah. And if you're missing out on that, it oftentimes it's a mixture of that and also the fact that what happens during an apnea, I should have maybe started with that, right?
No, this is amazing. So much to cover.
What happens during an apnea is your airway is becoming blocked or obstructed, or it's collapsing. So for some reason, and there can be multiple different reasons why that happens, your upper airway is not working correctly, so the oxygen doesn't get to your brain. So what happens is your brain panics and says, oh gosh, like we need to wake up because we're not getting enough oxygen, and sends a lot of stress hormones throughout your body to wake you up, which is good because then you don't die. But then you have all of this cortisol and different stress hormones going on. And that can be why people are waking up with a pounding chest or feeling just unexplained anxiety all the time, because they're kind of, when they're supposed to be sleeping, they're constantly being woken up and falling asleep. And yeah, so that's one thing that I think a lot of women that I've talked to, I've done a number of different interviews on my podcast with women who have been misdiagnosed and told that they have panic disorder, or they're having panic attacks at night, or anxiety, right? So they get diagnosed as having anxiety, which anxiety can stand alone as a condition. Sure. But with people with sleep apnea, oftentimes the underlying sleep apnea is the cause of that. And so treating the sleep apnea can help with the anxiety. But with women, one of the things that's really interesting and I've obviously lived this as a woman with sleep apnea who went undiagnosed for 10 years, but there's so many things throughout a woman's life and hormonal fluctuations which can almost mimic sleep apnea, or sleep apnea, like, it seems like it explains sleep apnea symptoms. And so especially around pregnancy and menopause. So people during pregnancy, you gain weight, and that can be a factor in either developing sleep apnea for the first time or worsening sleep apnea that you already have. So that's actually quite common, but it goes misdiagnosed and undiagnosed all the time because OBGYNs aren't really trained to look for that. So they're more checking on the health of the baby and making sure, they're looking at some things like blood pressure, but they're not really digging into what's happening with the mother's sleep, which I think is really needs to change. Because obviously, like, imagine a mother who is stopping breathing multiple times an hour. The oxygen isn't going to their brain, but it's also not getting to the baby. So we're way too early. Like, they're only just starting to research this stuff. But it's certainly, I mean, just common sense, like, that can't be good, you know?
Right.
So it would be better if more women were screened for sleep apnea during pregnancy. But the other one is menopause.
Yes.
So during menopause, in pregnancy, people are told you're tired because you're pregnant.
Right.
You know, they're essentially just kind of turned away and not tested for sleep apnea. And then in menopause, what happens is so many of the symptoms, so women are at greater risk of sleep apnea sort of during and after menopause. It's partly weight gain, but there's also other elements that feed into that. And I'm not a researcher, so
yeah, sure.
But certainly there's a lot of people researching like those links. And so what happens though is doctors see women and they say, I'm having disrupted sleep. I'm getting up to use the bathroom a lot at night. I'm having really big mood swings and, you know, like mental health issues, like all these different things. And lots of doctors are saying, well, that seems like it would be menopause and would be normal to go along with menopause. So it can be really difficult to tease out what's happening. But I think that if people have like daytime sleepiness consistently, even though they're sleeping for long enough at night, that's, you know, they're having a full night's sleep. I kind of think like the daytime sleepiness really needs to be investigated.
100%. Yeah. And, you know, some of the things that we can see, the unfortunate courses that people end up going down when they are going into their doctors. And unfortunately, I think it's a systemic problem. Their doctor, in our current situation in the West, the average doctor is getting around 2 hours of training in sleep, period.
Yes.
I mean, and that's out of Harvard Medical. So good luck getting even any sort of knowledge because they just don't know. And unfortunately, we've got a systemic problem here that is real gap and a missing of the prioritization of this thing that we do a third of our lives. So what ends up happening, because they don't have the screening available for themselves to then screen you properly. So then what ends up happening is we often see then people are being put onto different medications for the mental health concerns or cardiovascular concerns or all the systemic fallouts here. So I really appreciate that you're helping us to get more towards what could be the root cause for so many people. So it's just,
I mean, that's so true, like so true. But I also think that Sam Kashani would have an argument with me. But so Dr. Kashani is always like, well, we just need to change the whole system and train those doctors and make sure that they know more, which I totally agree with him. But in the meantime, I think empower as many patients as you can to say, and you really do have to advocate for yourself.
You do.
You have to say, I have all of the symptoms for obstructive sleep apnea. Please refer me for a sleep study. Yeah. And one of the other problems about screening, I mean, is even getting a doctor that knows enough to even know that they need to screen you for sleep apnea, right?
Yeah,
but
like good luck.
Even the ones who know about sleep apnea, they're using quite often screening questions that really are more skewed towards older, overweight men.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt that there's a lot of sleep apnea in that population, right? Which is why they do it statistically. They're like, well, if you have a much bigger neck and you're an older, overweight man, you're statistically more likely to have sleep apnea. Right. But the problem with that is that those are the people that they're looking for. And those of us who definitely have sleep apnea, but don't fit a lot of those criteria, just don't get, even on screening tests, you know, like, even though I had sleep apnea, I still would not pass that test.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
and to your point around the empowerment and taking the time to learn for all of us, I think there's a real opportunity. And also this kind of sleep renaissance that's kind of happening where we're starting to see more and more companies making it easier and easier. There are certain companies that within 24 hours, you can get a sleep test available to your home around $200 or what have you.
And so that's what I'm so excited for, right? Because it's really changing. At the moment, I'm putting together a little series for my podcast, which will come out in January. And I'm speaking to different patients who have used all sorts of telemedicine home testing for this. One of the things I do on my podcast is just kind of provide an opportunity for lots of grown men to cry. But I had an ex-Marine who had been struggling with this stuff for so long. And he had been to the doctor and he'd been for the sleep study. He had sleep apnea. They gave him a CPAP machine. He had no support and he just abandoned it, which is what happens with so many people. So for good reason, right? Because it's difficult and you need support. But he used a company, one of these companies where he did the telemedicine appointment and they just like held him by the hand through the whole process. And even after he got his machine, he had someone talking to him all the time about how to, you know, which mask was going to work for him, how to improve his settings for his comfort. And after years and years of having to sleep in the other room, he got to move back into his bedroom with his wife.
And
the difference it makes to people's lives is huge. And I think oftentimes the current system is failing people.
I could not agree more. So I'm excited
for a lot of I think that that's the way it's going to go. I think that the better wearables get, and then the better that telemedicine support gets, those things together are just going to make it so much easier for people to get diagnosed.
Yes, so huge. So with that, well, one, I think I highly recommend, and I've shared for so many people to check out your podcast because, you know, it's called Sleep Apnea Stories for a reason, because you create a forum in which people can share their stories, but also share their victories. So if anyone is listening and saying, well, all right, fine, maybe I was either diagnosed with sleep apnea, but I don't quite know what to do next, or had struggled with my current options that I went through and they didn't fit for me, but I need more guidance, like you answer those things. Or if people are questioning, oh, maybe this is me, I better get tested, then there's a whole world of steps and actions that can be taken. I mean, just even the oral appliance options that are available are just in the hundreds and hundreds. I mean, just so many in alignment with CPAP and maybe both in tandem. I mean, there's so much that can be taken on.
So I think one of the needs I think that my podcast is trying to fill is that whole, so the current system, a lot of times what happens is people will go, they'll get tested, they'll have sleep apnea, and then be prescribed a CPAP machine by a sleep specialist. And then that's kind of all they're offered, right?
Yeah.
But actually, there's more of a spectrum of different treatments available, but it's just knowing where to go and which specialist to ask. So especially, so you mentioned with the oral appliances. So one of the big things about that is finding a specialist dentist that can fit one of those for you.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. I mean, I've had lots of people on the podcast talking about it, but really with that, you want to start with the American Academy of Dental Sleep Medicine and find a provider near you who's done all the training in this and can really do a good job fitting that. But also, well, we haven't, this is a total tangent, but we haven't even talked about mild, moderate, and severe.
Yes, I know. The struggle I have in our conversation is to not take hours for you.
I know.
I have 9 million questions I want to be able to bring to. So yes, please, if you do have the time, please share that.
So really quickly, the treatment options are going to largely depend on how severe your sleep apnea is. So side note, this is kind of an odd thing about sleep apnea. So there's a thing called the Apnea Hypopnea Index.
Yeah.
And what they do is the sleep tech who scores your sleep study marks how many times you stop breathing for 10 seconds or more. And then they also look at what's called a hypopnea, where your airway narrows. It doesn't completely close and shut off the air, but it drops your oxygen. So they look at your oxygen desaturation. So since everybody listening is probably techie, probably like all that. So they look at that, they give you a score. And so the ranges are, so they reckon anything below 5, they consider normal, even though I've talked to a lot of people who are stopping breathing 4 times an hour and are exhausted, as you might imagine. So that's a whole nother thing. But as far as a sleep specialist is concerned, anything below 5 is just normal and you don't have sleep apnea. So for those people, there's another thing called upper airway resistance syndrome, where you would probably have to go to either get the actual results of your test and go to a sleep tech who can individually tell you if you have upper airway resistance syndrome. So that's a whole nother show. But then if you're between 5 and 15, then that's called mild sleep apnea. Between 15 events and 30 events is moderate sleep apnea. Anything above 30 events an hour is considered severe. So the reason that's important is for the oral appliances you're talking about, those are FDA approved for people with mild and moderate sleep apnea. So if you have less than 30 events an hour, doesn't work for every single person, but it's definitely an option that you could try. So they tend to not recommend those as much for people with severe sleep apnea just because the data isn't as compelling. Yeah. So for other things that people can do, so people that are in the mild category, it's kind of different from moderate and severe. Moderate and severe, if you leave the sleep apnea untreated, they reckon your chances of long-term like stroke and heart attack and all sorts of comorbidities goes way up. So it's really important to get some sort of effective treatment. Yeah. For mild sleep apnea, the same can't be said. So with mild sleep apnea, I think it's always a great idea to find something that'll help you to breathe better and sleep better at night, right? So if I were you, I would totally try and find like an oral appliance or something that would help. But as far as like long-term health consequences, it's not quite as dire for people with mild sleep apnea. One of the things that just came on the market is the XIOSA device, which you probably already talked about on your show. Yeah. Essentially what that does is tones and strengthens your tongue. And often your tongue is involved with blocking your airway at night. And so they're still kind of in the clinical trials. They're still looking at what it does with moderate sleep apnea, but certainly it's approved for mild sleep apnea right now and snoring too. And so it could be, if you're in that category, that might work for you. I interviewed a couple of people that did that, and you actually use that device during the day, and it just helps, to tone and strengthen everything and improve it. So that's another option for mild sleep apnea. And so hopefully that's going to be, it will depend what their clinical trials say for moderate sleep apnea, but maybe it'll help the rest of us too. I don't know.
Absolutely.
And then some other things are the Inspire implant. So essentially what the Inspire implant does is they implant it in your chest and they run a tiny wire up to your tongue. And it essentially, as you breathe in or inspire, which is why it's called that, it moves your tongue out of your airway so you can breathe. And so for some people, not for everybody, but if you can go and see a surgeon that does that operation and they can tell you if you're a good candidate or not. But for some people, that can be a total lifesaver, game changer. So that's another option.
So many options. And,
there's a lot.
And how about like the airway stents and Vivos and all of these, just goes to the bespoke element of this, how it really does depend on what each individual person is dealing with.
Yeah. So
are those some other ones you recommend?
For a lot of people, so for some people, they have sleep apnea because maybe they had a big weight gain and there's more pressure on their airway and that's the main reason, right? Other people have something where their airway didn't really develop properly. And a lot of that is to do with mouth breathing as a child. Oftentimes people have low and forward tongue posture, which means that their upper palate didn't expand properly. And they develop as mouth breathers. They're not nasal breathers. And that's really important when it comes to sleep apnea. So there's a couple of different removable appliance options. There's either Vivos or Homeoblock. Those, we're still really waiting for enough data on that, right? Yeah. To kind of see exactly how many people that helps. Like I've certainly interviewed one woman who's here in Florida who that worked really well for. She wore these appliances for 2 years and her AHI went from severe to less than 5. So, and it solved her issue. And so usually the expansion thing is happening along with myofunctional therapy and also breath work, particularly Buteyko breathing. So you're looking at changing your functional breathing patterns to nasal breathing and not mouth breathing. So, and so if people are interested in that, you probably talked about James Nestor's book, Breath. Yes. but that's
best.
usually where people start. And then you go down the rabbit hole from there.
Yeah.
But as far as like other palate expansion options, the reason that helps people is expanding your palate. If you imagine your roof of your mouth is the floor of your nose, so the theory goes, expands your nasal airway. So your nasal cavity gets larger because of that. So again, there's not really enough data that they've done to say do this and it will definitely get rid of your sleep apnea. It's not like that, but depending on the individual person, it depends what you have going on. And if you find a specialist dentist who really knows about this stuff, they can kind of advise you more. The other options are, if you talk to traditionally trained dentists, they'll tell you it's not possible to use a removable appliance to expand your upper palate because they think the palatal suture fuses in adulthood. So a lot more sort of accepted by the dental community is doing MARPE or SARPE or MSE. There's these different ways of what they do is make an incision and cut your palatal suture and expand it using various different devices. So that's another option. And that leads into double jaw surgery.
Oh, yes.
Which some people do and can be really effective for some people in expanding their airway and meaning they don't need any sort of CPAP or oral appliance at night. So yeah, there's a lot of different options.
There's a lot of different options. Okay. Well, then having said all that, I think one of the things that you're pointing to is just, this is not a one and done. It's not where you get diagnosed with sleep apnea, no matter mild, moderate, severe, upper airway resistance, and then you get this one thing and then you're done for like you have to actually actively educate yourself and advocate for yourself, as you shared, so that you can be at the source of, okay, this worked a little, but we also need some tweaking here, or this didn't work at all. We need something totally different. You have to really be at the source of this. But what's on the other side of that? And I'm sure with your stories that you've shared with people and for yourself, a whole other world that opens up of feeling rested and having some of these just fundamental shifts in the ability to feel at ease, the mental clarity, the lowering of anxiety, the mood stability, cardiovascular. I mean, just the list is endless.
I mean, honestly, for a lot of people, the ability to work. And
basic human
maintain
needs.
Relationships. And like it really is. I think that sometimes when I speak to people who, have had a really bad experience, and which I totally understand, like some people haven't been supported through the CPAP thing at all, and they haven't been told there's any other options, and they just got really fed up with it, which I understand. But I also look at the future health events that you're preventing. Like, it's difficult to think long term, but I've interviewed a number of people now that have lost loved ones to untreated sleep apnea, and it is really serious. So I think like it's that, but it's also, like you say, the improved quality of your life is huge. Like, going from falling asleep at the wheel and just not even having any energy for my kids to being able to actually, function. Now, I'm not a great success story because I don't think my journey's over yet, Molly, but a lot of people...
That makes you even better, I think, because, and listen up, people, because that makes me even more encouraging of people to listen to your podcast because you're in the thick of it and you're helping to Sherpa. Sherpa.
I feel like there's nothing that I'm not trying.
Yes, which we want. We don't want someone that's all perfect and now they're fine. Like, no.
But I also think it's one of those things that's really misunderstood by people, because this changes a lot over your life and there's a lot you can do to really take control of your health. So like my most recent excursion has been so I have a lot of different allergies. And so recently, anti-inflammatory eating, like there's been a number of studies where they've talked about, not just for sleep apnea, for a lot of chronic conditions, about how following like an anti-inflammatory diet can really help improve how you sleep at night, but also like the quality of your life the rest of the time when you're awake. So that's one of the things I've been experimenting with, and it is really astonishing, the difference. I know that, people are all different, and it's important to have testing with a doctor or, wherever you go. But for me, individually, I have the issues with gluten and with dairy.
Yeah.
And so
Same.
I find it's completely different. A day where, I pretty much just don't really dabble with them anymore just because my sleep is so much worse.
Yep.
There's
100%.
things like this that you learn over time that can really help. And one of the other elements to all this is your nose and having a functioning nose. And so many people have problems with their nose, and that really feeds into problems with CPAP because you're really supposed to breathe through your nose all the time. But so many of us have either what we talked about before, where it didn't develop, our face didn't develop properly because of the way that we were mouth breathing and didn't have the correct tongue posture and all these factors. But also a lot of people have deviated septums and turbinate problems and things that are exacerbated by allergies and inflammation. So that's a big factor. So sometimes for some people, seeing an ENT helps them, right?
Yeah.
So I've talked to people who have been to an ENT and had tonsils removed and surgery done to their nose, and they go from having sleep apnea and struggling with CPAP to not having it anymore. But, that's not every person. So the whole thing, I was just going to say about diagnostic testing, like we have sleep studies which shows what's happening after your airway collapses or is blocked. But the only real test we have to show what's actually happening in someone's airway at the moment is called a DICE procedure, a drug-induced sleep endoscopy. And those are really expensive and not available to most people. And they do them usually as part of, like, if you're going in for another surgery, they might do it at the same time. And essentially that kind of shows them how your airway is collapsing, which areas to focus on or whatever, like, especially if they're doing some sort of surgery to your throat. But for most people, we don't have that. So a lot of it is a sort of trial and error. This treatment worked for me, this one didn't. And, it can be frustrating and a long journey, which is why you need a supportive gang.
Yes, absolutely. Well, for anyone listening, make sure that you get connected to Emma's gang because she's created just so many different kind of allies in this conversation, and with Project Sleep and all of these different things that, really helping to share that we don't have to be alone on this journey, that there's many people and many companies and nonprofits and for-profit and all these different opportunities for other people to be along the journey with you. So I so appreciate that. And maybe one of the things we might be able to learn more about is by understanding how you're managing your sleep apnea right now. And I love how you're open about the fact that you're like, I'm still, it's improved, but you're still, doing all these different things. So I think it will be really cool for us to see, well, what are you doing? What's the latest? So we always ask people 4 questions. And our first one is, what is your nightly sleep routine looking like right now? And I'm very curious to hear what the latest is.
Okay. So my nightly sleep routine is I make sure that I have nothing to do with my children's bedtimes.
Great.
Because they got older and now they're 15 and 10 and they stay up too late for me because I go to bed really early.
Yes.
So I usually I feel like I don't do all the right things because I'm probably on screens too late for you.
All good.
So I interviewed Olivia Arizola.
Yes.
And she was telling me about these light bulbs that don't have, they only have a certain type of light. They don't have blue light or whatever.
Yes.
So I have that in the lamp on my bedside table. So I feel like I'm crushing it with that.
Yeah.
And then what else happens in my routine? I always have a warm shower or a bath.
Great.
And wash my face if I'm really crushing it.
Yes.
And then I get all situated with my CPAP. And
yes. What does that look like? Tell us everything.
So what that looks like is, cleaning CPAPs is a whole thing.
Oh, yes.
Which I spend a lot of time on Instagram and on my podcast talking about. So everything's already super clean by the time I'm there because I've already done that earlier in the day. And then I essentially just make sure that my humidifier is completely full with distilled water.
Good.
And then I go to sleep.
I love that.
And I think that's about my only routine. I would lie and say that I do yoga and stuff, but I don't.
No, I appreciate that. We want to keep it real.
Right.
Okay. So I'm curious your thoughts on the mouth tape piece. Any call outs there? Any concerns, cautions?
So
anything
here's the thing about the mouth tape. If you can breathe well through your nose, I think mouth tape is a great idea.
Yeah.
If you can't breathe super well through your nose, I mean, I think honestly with the mouth taping thing, I think it's a great idea to just get checked. If you have any concerns about it, like most people who have no problems with their nose are just going to shove mouth tape on and be like, this is great and try it out, right?
Right, sure.
But if you have concerns that you can't breathe properly through your nose or you can't get enough oxygen, then I would go and see either a myofunctional therapist or an ENT and have them look at your nose and just kind of say that you're thinking about mouth taping and see what they say. So for me, I sometimes do mouth taping, but I usually use like myotape, which goes around your mouth, or you can actually do the same thing with kinesio tape. You can just like cut it and it doesn't actually go in front of your mouth. So those are ideas just because I think a lot of people using CPAP worry about like, I mean, you probably have to try hard, like with some of the mouth tapes on the market to actually like breathe them in or something. Yeah. But if you're worried about any of that, there are options that don't actually go in front of your mouth. They just gently keep your mouth closed. But certainly keeping your mouth closed is really important for any CPAP user. And it's really important generally for people with snoring and sleep apnea. Yeah. Because the worst thing, you don't want to be lying flat on your back with your mouth open. It's just like the worst. The worst. So, and I have my video about that. I have like 3 tips for obstructive sleep apnea. And I think that they would work for anybody. It's really about the best position to be in so that you don't snore and have sleep apnea. So
I love
people
that.
can check that out.
So helpful. Thank you. Yeah, because it is layered. I think now it's, become this thing that's, another hack. Okay, throw some mouth tape on. And there are considerations that we want to really be clear on. So
I think especially people who are doing it because they're snoring. Like I've seen on social media a little bit, like there's people who are like, oh, my husband was snoring. I made him use mouth tape. But I'd rather that they look at like, why is he snoring? Yeah. And does he need to go and have a sleep study just to check that he doesn't have sleep apnea? Because if you have sleep apnea and then you just put tape on your mouth, that is not going to solve your sleep apnea.
Definitely not. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
If it did, I would have already figured that out.
Yeah, we would have invested in mouth tape companies.
At the moment, I'm not doing mouth tape as much, but it depends. So my nose is tiny and I have the allergies and all the stuff. So if I'm not eating dairy and gluten and I am doing my nasal sprays and it's not any major allergy, like seasonal allergy situation, then I'll sometimes mouth tape. And I do notice a difference. I do think it's better. But one of the reasons why it's not good for people to sleep with an open mouth with CPAP is especially if you have a nasal mask or a nasal pillows mask. Yeah. It really affects whether your treatment works, because if you have your mouth open, any sleep tech will tell you that the pressure isn't going into your airway to open, like it's affecting your pressure because the air goes in your nose and out your mouth.
Absolutely. Oh, see, everyone, this is why you need to check out her podcast, because clearly there's so many, there's
so
layers.
Much
there's so
it.
much.
Oh my gosh,
it's wild. So, okay, then what may we see with your morning sleep routine? And we say your morning sleep routine on purpose because we are pointing to that how you're managing your day really does impact your results with your sleep. So curious if
I think you're going to be really impressed with me, Molly.
Okay.
So here's what I now do in the morning. I stumble out of bed. I used to make myself get up really early and get my kids ready. And now they just basically want to be left alone to get ready on their own and they don't need me. So now I wake up and I straight away put on my running shoes and my workout clothes that I put out the night before.
Oh my God.
And I walk around my circle. I live on a circle. It's really suburban.
Yeah.
So I walk outside in the morning sunlight, which is really good
Amazing.
for my sleep.
Yes, it is.
So I usually do, so it's like 2.4 miles. So I always do one circle. I sometimes do two. It depends.
Ooh, look at you. And I
So
love
that's kind of my morning. And then I come back and, get ready and start spreading awareness about sleep apnea.
full day ahead. The fact that you do that first part is like half the battle for so many people, just to start that kind of circadian process, letting our body
and
know.
what I love about my walk is how many things it layers, right? So we're habit stacking.
Yes.
So we've got the outside light. We've got the social interaction with people that I go, hey, and I chat to them every morning.
Yeah.
Which is really good for your mental health. If people are not doing that, chit-chatting with people on your morning walk is huge.
Oh, yeah. We're about to have Sonia Lieber-Mirsky on the podcast, which we're so excited about, who wrote The How of Happiness and big researcher on happiness. And that's one of the things she speaks to is connections, and then includes, connection with the local clerk and saying hi. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Definitely.
So good. Thank you for that.
So there's that. And then I did do myofunctional therapy for a number of months with a myofunctional therapist to help me retrain to nasal breathing and have my tongue somewhat where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Still working on it. But so in the morning I do so while I'm on my walk, I'm making sure that I have my tongue in the correct position on the roof of my mouth.
Yes.
And I also do some potato breathing exercises.
Stacking it all. See?
So, yeah.
Starting the day off right.
So I think sometimes people are like wondering, like, well, why would you do that during the day? Like, how is that helping your sleep apnea? But partly how you're breathing during the day does feed into how you breathe at night. But also just that having your tongue in the correct place and doing correct breathing improves the quality of your life. So really, really like calms you down. And so I've always struggled with anxiety, and I noticed that is a lot more under control the more that I breathe correctly and the more I have my tongue in the correct position.
I love that. And it just points to, for me personally, I can now say that I feel grateful for what I went through with my sleep, my periods of insomnia, my rock bottoms in my life, because it's actually taught me so much about what you can bring in, your own level of self-efficacy to help support your life and the workability of your life. And look at just this amazing knowledge bank that you have available to yourself and to share with others. It's just fantastic. Okay, so great. So you got this great morning routine and stacking and all these things are here. So then what might we see on your nightstand? Or maybe proverbial nightstand. So meaning even when you're traveling, like what's there?
Yeah, on my bedside table, I have my CPAP machine, but I have it on like a sort of fancy looking tray.
Ooh, okay, this is new. Tell me more.
One of my Instagram followers sent me this picture of this amazing, she had like her CPAP in a sort of basket. That was kind of like a rustic basket and you couldn't see the CPAP really. And she was just like, it looks amazing. I was like, it does look amazing. So I don't have that, but I have like a tray. And then I have like kind of all the stuff that goes with my CPAP right there. And then I always have books. I should have looked before.
Oh, that's okay.
Actually, what I'm reading right now is an advanced copy of Amy Porterfield's book, 2 Weeks Notice. Yeah. So that is literally what's on my nightstand. And I usually have printed out sleep apnea research and a highlighter pen, and that's kind of the main thing.
That sounds like my nightstand. Fantastic.
And the lamp with the not blue light.
Yes, fantastic. Light mindful.
I'm just trying to score points with you. And no technology. Like I have I don't like I kind of dabbled with had an Aura ring for a while, which I still have, but I I do it once every few months.
Yeah.
Because if I do it every night, I get obsessed with it.
Understood.
So
Yep.
no tech, just like my phone's plugged in the other side of the room. That's it.
I think there's something really to be said for that. Simplicity, minimalism, even from an EMF perspective, but then even just from a mental kind of perspective. I think that's fantastic. Then the last question would be, what has made the biggest change to your sleep game, or maybe the biggest aha moment you've had in managing your sleep?
So there are so many.
I know. Yeah, it's a hard one. I know. Same.
There are so many. So I think the biggest one is finally giving myself permission to be okay for my husband to sleep in the other room.
Oh, I love that one. That's a huge
We
deal.
got a dog. So we have a dog called Bear. I don't really think of myself as a dog person at all.
Yeah.
And I said no for the longest time. And then my kids just would look at me like so sorrowful. And finally we got this dog. So we've had Bear for about 2 years. And of course I love him.
Yeah, of course.
But I definitely, just with dealing with CPAP and having sleep apnea, even though it's well treated and all that, I still get irritated if I get woken up. So I'm okay with, like, I'll wake up from time to time and shift my mask or use the bathroom or something. But when other people wake me up, it just really aggravates me. So to begin with, when we got the dog and my husband was, sleeping next to me, the dog would come in, the dog would go out, and it was waking me up. And so we kind of talked about it, and my husband's fine with, whatever. So yeah, he started sleeping in the other room and with the dog. Our dog is so spoiled, but that really just made me feel like the calm of nobody is interrupting me.
Yeah.
It's I feel a little bit bad because I hear my husband telling my kids, like, don't wake your mother up. But it makes such a difference to the next day for me if I'm not interrupted by anything. So that really has been a huge positive for us.
I love that you say that, because we had Dr. Wendy Truxell on the podcast, and she was speaking to her book, Sharing the Covers, and really trying to help people explore this topic. It gets this dramatic name, a sleep divorce, or like, all the triggers that go off in our brains of like, well, this must be a problem. Oh my God. But really, she's pointing to that there can be so many times when that can make such a tremendous difference for people, and can be a real strategy to ensure that you're both happy people managing your sleep effectively. And sometimes people have different schedules or, considerations or habits or whatever. And so it can just be a game changer so that you're actually available mentally, physically, emotionally to, have a great relationship. And or get at the source if someone is snoring and that's keeping you awake. Well, let's check them for sleep apnea. Let's get the treatment. So then we can, if we do choose to share the covers, great. If we choose to go in different rooms,
and we do share the covers at other times. I don't want people to be worried. Like, our marriage is great. It's just that while we're actually sleeping,
well said.
I don't want to be woken up by other people. So,
oh my God, I love that asterisk. I think Wendy would love that too. We do actually share the covers when we need to share the covers. That is amazing. Well, I'm so glad you pointed to that one, because I thought for sure you would say sleep apnea, but I think that what's so great is that you're actually pointing to that there's so many layers to sleep.
Yeah. And I think, so one thing that we could talk all day. And so I think that one of the things as well that needs a lot more attention is the fact that people that have sleep apnea or any other sleep disorder, they can still struggle with other things that anyone is struggling with their sleep, right? So there's so many people that have sleep apnea and have co-occurring insomnia at the same time.
Absolutely.
So the thing about that, like, I know that you had Dr. Shelby Harris on your podcast, and I had her on mine. And so on mine, we talked about how these two co-occurring things can both be treated.
Yeah.
So people don't have to struggle with, they feel like they sleep badly because they have sleep apnea. Well, sometimes that's co-occurring insomnia, which you can also treat with CBTI or another treatment, to treat them both at the same time and just get the best sleep you possibly can. So
absolutely. Oh, so good. Well, the last thing I want to say for you is, how can people follow you? I'm sure people listening are like, wow, okay, this woman knows her stuff. I need to be a part of what she's doing. And so how can they do that? What are the best steps?
So there's also some people listening going, oh gosh, I'm glad that my partner is not listening to this because she would make me go and get exercise. Yeah, the best way to reach me. So I'm on social media wise, I'm only really on Instagram reliably.
Same.
So my Instagram handle is Sleep Apnea Stories. And then you can go to my website. I talked a little bit about, I've got a free video about 3 top tips for the best positions to sleep in for sleep apnea and that kind of thing. So people can go to my website, which is sleepapneastories.com. And I also just really quickly wanted to mention I'm on the board of directors for Project Sleep.
Yes.
So that's a nonprofit run by patient advocates with sleep disorders. And so we have a lot of big goals around raising awareness about sleep health, sleep equity, and sleep disorders. So that's also a good place to connect with this community of people with sleep disorders. So you can find Project Sleep on any social media, Project Sleep, and then their website is project-sleep.com.
So good. Oh, well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, for the difference you're making.
Thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, well, I so appreciate that. It's so wonderful to be connected with you. Like you said, the fact that we got to meet in real life and
I know.
And I know more and more to come. And I'm just so excited to continue to follow you. And I really, again, I can't underscore how much I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability and sharing. Like, I'm still on these journey. I'm discovering this myself, which I think, again, I'm not meaning to overstate it, but I think that just is really helpful for people listening because it allows you, right? It makes it accessible and you're helping to guide us and really share what you're discovering and the conversations you're having. And it just makes a huge difference. So appreciate you and appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much, Molly.
You've been listening to the Sleep is a Skill podcast, the #1 podcast for people who want to take their sleep skills to the next level. Every Monday, I send out something that I call Molly's Monday Obsessions, containing everything that I'm obsessing over in the world of sleep. Head on over to sleepisaskill.com to sign up.